Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Hancock, and along with my fellow community dinner theater player Patrick Curran, we make up Quantitude. We're a podcast dedicated to all things quantitative, ranging from the relevant to the completely irrelevant. In today's episode, we talk about latent transition analysis, which embeds latent class analysis within a longitudinal context, allowing us to explore, as well as to formally test, patterns of individual change in latent class membership over time. Along the way, we also mention identity crises, the crossword puzzler, the nihilist, here comes the asteroid, deck chairs and floating doors, grizzled 25-year-olds, burying the lead, victory yells, Pepsi versus Coke, magic wiping cloths, and lining up to slap Greg. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
So you and I randomly communicate throughout the day and late at night. I don't know when the heck you sleep, but I get texts from you around the clock. A lot of them make sense, but yesterday I got one that I found somewhat curious, which was a seemingly somewhat frantic text that said, "Dude, I don't even know who I am anymore." I think that fell into the class of he just needed to send that and I'm not sure this prompts a reply, which is why I did not reply.
I was in the middle of an identity crisis and I wanted to reach out to a true friend. And
were they not available?
So I kept going down the list. I just like that I send you this message where I'm clearly in need and you respond 18 hours later.
But we were going to meet. We have this on the schedule.
We'll take care of it tomorrow.
Please, now that we're here on our scheduled time, I'm here for you, friend. Why do you not know who you are anymore?
I have such respect for your clinical training. Okay, so between the two of us, you and I have been to so many faculty meetings, right?
Hundreds.
Yeah, just hundreds of meetings. And you have something that you always say about faculty meetings. Do you remember what that is?
I do. It's community dinner theater.
The City Council of Blaine gave me the responsibility of putting together a show. I have found here in Blaine a gold mine of talent.
Everybody has their role, everybody hits their mark, and everybody says their line.
Completely right. If you had seen a transcript of the meeting where all the names were removed, with 100% accuracy, you could assign the names back to that transcript.
We, too, have our roles, we have our lines, and we hit our marks, just like anybody else in the room.
Okay, so which character are you then?
I feel like I have gone from role to role.
Ooh.
When I was young and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I was the young Turk. I was the rebellious youth. I was gonna incite change for the good.
Sure.
Now, keep in mind, I had been a faculty for like an hour and a half. That transitioned into I was the passionately engaged guy. I was like, I'll volunteer for that. I'll be on that meeting. I will do all of this.
Okay.
And then I found out I was sleeping 2 hours a night. And so I kind of transitioned into the pragmatic leader, I would say, if you had to put a label on it. I became the director of the program. I was chair of the diversity committee. And it was like, all right, we are going to incite change, but we're going to do it quietly where they don't even know that we're doing it. So there's this pragmatism. But do you know what I've transitioned into now?
What's that?
The ambivalent guy.
Oh.
Now, this is not a bad thing because ambivalent is not disengaged. Ambivalent is, yeah, that'd be fine. Oh, I could see that. Sure, those three choices, any of those are fine. Those are my lines and marks right now, as I support whatever the committee thinks is best.
You went deep. I really like that. I was thinking much more surface characteristics for some of the different faculty prototypes. I was thinking stupid stuff like the person who just can't stop raising their hand over and over and over, right? Or the historian, the person who will say, yes, well, we did something like that in 1979. I have a lot of multitaskers, and they've got their laptop open and they might be doing R code. They might be on Amazon, but they're really not doing whatever the heck we're doing in the meeting. There is the parliamentarian, right? You know someone says something and they go, actually, Robert's Rules of Order would dictate that I've never even read Robert's Rules of Order. There's the person I refer to as the scribe. The scribe is the person who, when they say at the beginning, who will be taking notes for this, that person always volunteers so that they're being helpful, but they don't actually have to make a contribution except email out the notes at the end, right?
All right, so here's what's pretty funny. I scribbled a couple down. I kid you not, on my scribbles, it says historian.
Really?
And I wrote in 1978, we did this. Look, I'm going to hold it up to the Zoom camera. It's the bottom one there.
There it is.
So you said the historian in 1979.
That's spooky.
The world really only needs one of us. But some others that I would add to your lovely list, there is, because this is a family show, what I will frame as the brown noser, which is, oh, you couldn't have done any better with this than you did. And, oh, that is a wonderful idea. All right, so you know who you are out there.
Maybe you need to brown nose her a little bit, Peter.
The one that I'm pretty close to moving to in my final stint as a faculty member. Are you ready for this one?
Okay.
The crossword puzzler. That's the guy who sits in the back and inexplicably comes to the meeting, but works on a crossword puzzle. And I really think that's what the future holds for me. Okay. The guy who does the crossword puzzle.
Wow. I like that.
Now, we still haven't gotten to your identity crisis.
Okay. The thing that I became yesterday, and mind you, as a young faculty member, I saw all of the other people in the room, and not unlike my parents, I would say, I will never be like that person, right? But then as you get closer to them in age, you're like, oh yeah, I guess I understand that a little bit better, or I guess I owe that dead person an apology. So yesterday, I became the nihilist. I actually said the words, none of this matters. Okay. And then.
So you were Nietzsche.
Sure.
Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Friedrich Nietzsche.
It was like I was reading someone else's lines from the script, but these words are coming out of me. Historically, I've been, the optimist, the cheerleader, the encouraging person. And yesterday I said, and you're going to finish this line for me. This is all just rearranging. Go ahead.
The deck chairs on the Titanic.
I have become you. This is the problem. I've transitioned into you, and I don't like it.
Oh.
That was my crisis.
I should have responded to your text because that was a legitimate crisis. I'm going to add that to my community dinner theater list.
Okay.
Why do we even bother?
I know. Inside, I'm just like, well, we're all going to get hit by a giant asteroid anyway. So.
Okay, well, I am deeply and sincerely sorry that you have become me.
Yeah, I'm not enjoying this transition, but it did get me thinking about today's topic, which you already telegraphed very nicely, the idea that we might over time be transitioning or shifting into these different categories or typologies. So today's topic, latent transition analysis.
This is one of those things I think that is so cool because analytically, it is a pain in the patootie. I'm going to telegraph Greg's new persona in community dinner theater, and I'm going to say, why do we even bother doing this?
Here comes the asteroid.
Here comes the asteroid. But theoretically, this makes a lot of sense. Substantively, we believe these things to exist. There are latent classes that we do not directly observe, but we can infer based on characteristics of things that we did observe. I mean, think about it like a latent variable in a factor analysis. We believe this underlying factor exists. We can't directly observe it, but we can infer its existence based on what we did observe in the indicator. communicators. Well, just think about that factor now as a class. Go into a faculty meeting and different people belong to different classes. The Young Turks, the passionately engaged, the crossword puzzlers. But we don't know who belongs to what, but we can observe them in the room and then make a probabilistic determination about how many classes there are and who belongs to which class. Like, we really, really want to do this.
Way back in the day, we actually had an episode dealing with mixtures. I think it was the first season. I don't remember exactly which one. Do you remember
Mixture a lot.
Yeah, Sir Mixture a lot. Mainly what I remember was that there was almost no way to edit that song so that
Mix a lot and kick them nasty thoughts. Baby got back.
Because what we're going to talk about today does have its foundations in mixture kinds of modeling, do you want to drop some science on us about mixture models?
I will, although I will do this pretty quickly, just to orient us to what we're going to explore in a few minutes. So we are recording this on Wednesday morning. Yesterday was election day. I was listening to NPR this morning, and it got me thinking about this. All right, so this was 11 minutes before we put on Zoom, and so I put my usual amount of preparatory effort into this episode. Imagine that we have a big sample of people, and we know if they're a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. So we have two observed groups. Let's say we have some continuously scaled item that is your opinion about should there be universal pre-K education.
Okay.
1 to 10, low to high, how much do you support pre-K? And we want to know, is there a difference in the mean of this item as a function of whether you're a registered Republican or a registered Democrat? Well, it's a t-test. What we want to know is there a difference in the distribution of this item as a function of the two known groups? All right, now somebody comes to you and says, hey, funny story, I want to do exactly the same thing, but we don't actually know what the groups are. We believe there are latent groups, that there's population heterogeneity, that there are segments, that there are classes. What we can do is do what's called a univariate finite mixture model. Let's say there are two latent classes that exist in a population, and we did not directly observe group membership. Let's say that for the variable that we're measuring, it has a different mean and variance within each of these two groups. Well, if they're mixed together, maybe half the sample are from group 1 and half the sample are from group 2, we have one aggregate distribution. It's very easy to show that the aggregate of two normal distributions that have a different mean and variance is actually not normally distributed. And this is very simple to picture. Say one has a higher mean and a smaller variance, one has a lower mean and a bigger variance, and you put those together, well, by necessity, it's going to be lumpy and long-tailed. And Pearson said, hey, I got an idea. If we assume that those are normal within each class, we can actually make a guess at separating those. And to say there's one latent class that has this mean and variance, there's one latent class that has this mean and variance, and there are mixing probabilities. What's the probability you would be in this class versus that class? That's a univariate finite mixture model. So maybe what we would do is take all those adults that we have, look at your attitude toward universal pre-K, and to say, are there subgroups who feel differently about this? Okay, so that is a latent class in the simplest form. So now let's expand it and say, okay, we have your attitude toward pre-K, for free lunch for all kids in school, for a need for a strong military, on the utility of tariffs, on redistricting local elections. All right, now we've got a multivariate finite mixture, and instead of one mean, we have a mean vector on all the items. Instead of one variance, we have a covariance matrix. That's just a multivariate mixture. But we still want to say, look, there are these two classes who have these means and, importantly, these variances and covariances among these different items, and they differ from this other class that has different means and different covariance structure. But then somebody leaned back and said, hey, wait a minute, all right? And this somebody, he didn't develop it himself, but did a lot of really important work, a guy named Gibson. In factor analysis, let's say we have 5 items and they correlate with one another. What we say is they correlate because they have a shared common cause. That's the latent variable. If we estimate and remove the effects of that common cause, those residuals are independent of one another. Well, think about that covariance matrix within each of these latent classes. You could lean back and say, well, wait a minute, we could kind of think about this like a measurement model. Given class membership, there are mean differences and variance differences, but there are no correlations among the items within the class. Very much you can think about it as a measurement model. And indeed, Gibson's work showed that if you have an EFA with, say, K factors, if you have what is called a latent profile analysis, which is a multivariate mixture, but that has conditional independence within class, if you do a latent profile analysis with one more factor than in the EFA, they're numerically equivalent.
Yeah, you can't actually tell the difference between those two models without other theoretical or substantive information.
Yep. But that's a really quick trip down memory lane as a starting point.
Yeah, it's a good starting point, too. And as we move into this topic of latent transition analysis, I'm going to start with the idea of having this latent variable where the latent variable itself is not continuous. It has these underlying categories that are potentially meaningful to us. But what is the evidence of those categories? Patrick gave us, what do you have, like 5 variables that might have something to do with your political orientation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if we use those in a mixture model, we might find there aren't just 2 political groups. Maybe there are 3 political groups that we didn't observe but were inferring from the data. One is traditional Republican-like, one is traditional Democrat-like, and then one is something different that we're not aware of. And it's based on the pattern of the relation among those 5 items.
Which is a really good point because it gives us an important distinction between categories that are measured and the categories that actually govern the way people function. People's behaviors might not function like Democrat and Republican. They might function in ways that we would define differently, whether it's liberal or conservative, or other ways that we hadn't thought about. So Patrick had 5 items, and those items involved some kind of response scale where I think you said like 1 to 10 or whatever. But back in the day, when people were thinking about latent class analysis as it was originally born, imagine those 5 items that Patrick had were just binary items for simplicity. So are you in favor of redistricting? Yes, no. Are you in favor of free lunch? Yes, no. Imagine them all just being a collection of binary items. And so now the question is whether or not the patterns of responses that people have are consistent with 1 underlying class, 2 underlying classes, 3 underlying classes. It's the same idea that Patrick had said, but historically, in traditional latent class analysis, those items were actually categorical. If we had all of those data, let's say, gathered at one time point, if we were asking those questions of people who are 18 years old, right, new voters, what might those categories turn out to be? What we get out of that model is very much like a measurement model. In fact, some people will call it a measurement model, but it has to do with how we would link not the latent variable in the sense of being continuous, but the categories associated with that latent variable with the probability of responding in certain ways. So if we identified this model as consistent with, we'll say for simplicity, 2 underlying latent classes, and I will call them liberal and conservative for the purposes of this example, then we might ask a question like, given that someone is in the liberal class, what is the probability that they will endorse free lunch? What is the probability that they would endorse redistricting? So in this type of model where we have these classic kinds of categorical indicators, we have these item response conditional probabilities where we ask what's the probability of a particular response given that you might be a member of a class. Those are very much like the traditional idea of loadings, but rather than relating continuous outcome variables to a continuous underlying factor, we're thinking about categorical indicator variables relating back to a categorical underlying latent factor.
And I love that tie to the factor model for two reasons. One, for a lot of us who were raised in homogeneous population with continuous measures, which very much I was, it gives me an anchor that I can kind of hold on to. Right, it's my door from the Titanic. This is my door that floats by and I climb onto.
There's no room.
There is no room.
Is there anyone alive out there?
It gives you an anchor to think about it, but also that's exactly what we're doing. In a 5-indicator continuous homogeneous factor model, when we estimate the loadings, those residuals are conditionally independent. No two residuals are related to one another because their correlations have been explained by the underlying factor. Well, now we're going to turn two knobs at once. One is, instead of a continuous underlying factor, we have a latent class to which individuals belong. And then instead of the continuous items where we're looking at conditional means, we have probabilities, and we still invoke the conditional independence.
That's right.
Now you can have differential probability of endorsement. So for example, if you're in class 1, there's a high probability you're going to endorse pre-K and free lunch, but a lower probability that you're going to endorse a strong military and that tariffs are successful. Right, that's those probabilities, but those items are independent of one another within that class.
Right.
They're just conditionally independent.
Well, so imagine that we do that at a given time point. And by do that, I could mean that we have these items that relate to people's perspectives on a number of different issues. In fact, they could be continuous items. They could be categorical items. For the purposes of what we're going to be talking about, it could be either. What can't be either, though, is the latent variable. In everything that we're talking about, the foundation of this is that the factor of interest is a latent class variable. Whether it is some kind of political orientation that we're talking about, but lots of other things that these models are used for as well. Substance use, right? People could get asked about their behaviors with respect to a variety of different substances or alcohol use patterns, and we're looking for these underlying classes that define different patterns of use. Or in education, there might be people who fall into different classes with respect to problem-solving strategies that they use, like in a math context. In a business environment, in a work environment, there might be some people who are in a more engaged class and some people who are in a more burned out kind of class. So you can imagine all kinds of different contexts where we don't really think about things in terms of underlying continua. We think about them in terms of these underlying categories. The key for what we're doing here today, though, is imagine that we measured all of those at one particular time point, determined how many classes we are comfortable with based on the data, based on their interpretation, based on fit of this particular model, and then we went to another time point. So I mentioned those variables that you had at age 18. Now imagine we went to those same voters, has to be the same people, when they are 25 years old, and now we ask all of those people the same questions. Let me just ask you, do you expect them to respond the same way, Patrick?
I absolutely think that they're going to change over time. I'm not a political scientist. I have no idea. But when you think about the faculty trajectories of me coming in as a young Turk, and then you kind of learn the lay of the land and you're like, oh, these people aren't as dumb as I thought they were, kind of thing. I absolutely would expect if you're 18 and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and coming out of high school and are going to change the world, and at 25, you're grizzled, hard-smoking, hard-drinking college grad trying to find a job. Oh, you're damn right those are going to change.
That's a rough 7 years, man. Yeah. So now let's just say we repeat the exact same latent class analysis that we did, and we look to see how many classes we would extract in the grizzled 25-year-old group. There's an interesting question just right off the bat, and that is, are we getting the same classes to emerge? Are those classes having the same links to the measured variables? And just to be very clear, it's okay to have different probabilities in groups, but still have the same overarching structure. And we know that from our regular old factor analysis stuff, that people could increase in the amount of a factor that they have at a different point in time, but that factor still manifests itself in the measured indicators in the same way. So we have the same principles operating here. We could have the same classes emerge from those variables at age 25, and they could have the same links to those variables that we have down there, but that doesn't mean we have the same proportions of people in those different classes.
This is conceptually similar to configural invariance. Do the classes look the same at 18? Do the classes look the same at 25? But it sure as heck doesn't mean you have to belong to the same class that you did before. And that's where we start cooking with gas.
Absolutely true. In fact, I love how you keep anchoring back to the factor model. And that is my anchor too. How does everything deviate from that? How does everything build on that? The interesting thing here is that, in fact, we might have an additional class at age 25 that we didn't have before. And that happens in lots of different latent class analyses where we look at them over time. There might be some developmental phenomenon that people have different skill sets and worldviews that they didn't have earlier on. So we might have some of the same latent classes at age 25, but we might have some additional ones as well. And that leads us to what for some people is an interesting question, and that is whether or not we have measurement invariance. Now, we think a lot about measurement invariance in longitudinal models that involve latent variables, and we lose our freaking minds when we sometimes when we don't have measurement invariance. Here, sometimes people ask questions about, hey, I wonder about the extent to which free lunch still is a good indicator of whatever it is. Those are very interesting questions. The key here, though, is really coming down to whether or not people appear to be in the same classes at age 25 as they were at age 18, or they have transitioned in terms of class. And that's where the idea of latent transition analysis comes from. We can do a latent class at age 18, we can do a latent class at age 25, but now when we get them all into the same model, we don't just have the proportions associated with those different classes or statuses, as they're sometimes called, at the two different time points. We have the relations between those two. It's like a crosstab, right? We now know the proportion of people who were in class 1 at both time points, or who were in class 2 at both time points, or who switched classes from time 1 to time 2. And that can be absolutely fascinating.
It is, but boy, did you bury the lead on that one in saying the proportion of cases. Because if we could hard assign people to classes at 18, so I'm in class 2, Greg's in class 1, and then we were able to hard code them at age 25, it'd be simple to do a crosstabs and find out what those probabilities are.
Yeah.
But you very nicely judoed your way out of that minor problem that we're looking at the probability of a latent transition from one class to the other. But funny story, we don't know which class people actually belong to. And so there's a probability of belonging to a class that has a probability of transitioning to another class that you have a probability of being a member. Discuss.
Yeah, other than that. So this is not unlike what we experience in factor analytic or structural equation models, right? We have this latent variable at time 1, we have the latent variable at time 2, and we want to know how those latent variables covary or correlate with each other. Wait, we want to know how this variable over here we didn't observe and this variable over here we didn't observe relate to each other, right? And so we...
This is why biostatisticians hate us. Yeah. I mean, among other things.
That's right. This is not unfamiliar territory to us. It's just that we didn't observe the proportions of people in the latent classes at age 18, but we can estimate them. We can do the same thing at age 25. And in a more comprehensive model that includes both time points, we can not read the probabilities off of the data, but we can say, looking at the patterns that we have in the data, what underlying probabilities would that be associated with respect to the categories that people fall into into both at age 18 and 25. And that is absolutely fascinating, right? Ask yourself, what's the probability that someone is more liberal at age 18 and then stays more liberal by age 25? What is the probability that someone is liberal at age 18 but then becomes more conservative by the time they are the grizzled old age of 25? What's the probability that someone goes from conservative at age 18 to being more liberal at age 25? I don't know, but those are the interesting questions that we can get here. How big are those probabilities associated with staying in the same class? Probabilities of switching classes. These classes are descriptively interesting, and we can do hypothesis testing of them as well.
Think about child development. Early infancy, there's just one honking factor of negative affectivity. It's just screaming, right? Are you happy? You scream. Are you sad? You scream. Did you just have a good poop? You scream. Now, Greg and I haven't moved out of that ourselves.
I still scream after.
You know, who doesn't? Just let out a victory yell.
Honey, are you okay in there?
Okay, so anyway, as people go over time, not only would you expect classes to exist, but you would expect them to change. So this is what's really cool, is Greg is highlighting that there are two things going on. One is the very nature of the latent class structure could change over time. Mm-hmm. When you're 18, you kind of believe what your parents believe, right? Your dad drinks Pepsi, so you drink Pepsi.
Pepsi. The choice of a new generation.
And so you come out of the home more or less with belief structure of your family. Obviously not always, but a lot of the time. But then you go out in the world and you meet people at college, or you get a job, and then you get married and you start paying taxes and you get that first paycheck and you say, I'm sorry, where did a third of it go? And your ideas start to change. So the classes change, but then the probability that a given individual will belong to a given class can change with time, right? Maybe some stick with whatever, Pepsi, but one day you decide to take a walk on the wild side and you buy a Coke and you find out there's a whole different world out there.
It's a real thing.
Wouldn't an ice cold Coke taste great now?
But an interesting thing is a lot of people grouse that these kinds of mixture model, latent class, latent transition analysis is not guided by theory or a priori hypotheses, right. And you're just spinning the big dial on the Price is Right and seeing what comes up. And there's certainly an element of that, but you really can use this as an a priori theory testing framework, right?
Yeah, completely, right? It's like the difference between a confirmatory factor model where you just go, oh, hell, let them all correlate, or you impose a very specific structure. We can do the same thing here. If someone thought that drug use followed a particular gateway kind of pattern, then you would predict that going from certain levels of use to other levels of use would make a lot of sense, but then other patterns wouldn't make sense. You could test a model where you actually zero out certain transition probabilities because you don't think that's going to happen. You could think about the development of kids. I don't remember my Piaget categories, but you don't expect that kids who have reached some particular developmental level are going to all of a sudden backslide. You can impose a model where there's no backsliding allowed with particular phenomena. And we're only talking, by the way, about 2 time points just for simplicity, but now imagine that you do it at a 3rd time point, a 4th time point. You can start having lagged relations where you think that the category that someone is in at the 3rd time point might not just be a function of where they were at the 2nd time point, but there's some lagged relation that comes from the 1st time point. So whatever mental models you have for the way we structure things in the continuous factor world, there are beautiful analogs to that in this latent transition analysis world that correspond to very specific developmental theories that you can impose formally.
Okay, wise guy, this is sounding pretty good. I went to the Carolina State Fair with my daughter, and one of my favorite is to go into the big hall where they sell stuff. I mean, it's right out of a movie. It's like it's this magic wiping cloth for windows that you never have to clean. So I kind of feel like you're this guy, and it does this, and it does this. And you raise your hand and say, okay, but can it handle predictor variables? I mean, we do still have observable characteristics on these individuals. Maybe we have income. Maybe we have education. Maybe we have, are you living in a rural or an urban community? So you're at the state fair, you're selling latent transition analysis. Can we build those into these transition probabilities?
Why, Sonny, I'm glad you asked. Absolutely. Yes, of course you can.
Wait, it became 1922?
Step right up and buy some cigarettes for the war effort. These are definitely things that people want to do, right? If you're 18 years old and you could fall in these different classes, we might wonder the extent to which that depends on your family income. Very natural thing to ask. We could test whether or not the relation there differs at age 25. Even more interesting, though, is whether or not the transition between classes from age 18 to age 25 might be a function of family income or other characteristics. So definitely we can and would want to bring in those kinds of predictors. Now, there's some nuance and debate about the introduction of covariates and whether or not we do that when we're determining latent classes or we do that in a separate step. We're not going to unpack that here, but just know that there's a lot of thought that goes on around those kinds of issues. But right now, we're only talking about predictors.
But wait, there's more.
What about distal outcomes, right? You might want to know something about the extent to which class membership at different times is related to distal outcomes, but also about the transition patterns themselves. In the example that we've been talking about, a very simple outcome variable would be who you vote for in an upcoming election and the extent to which your class membership and your transitions in class membership might predict those kinds of outcomes. And what we're talking about right now is just about transitioning along one dimension. In this case, it's along a political dimension. We could have a whole other latent class model that we're doing in parallel with this. So imagine that paralleling this potential transition in these political latent classes, we also had personality variables. So we're interested in whether or not people fall into a particular personality type at age 18, personality type at age 25, whether or not they are transitioning in personality type. But the really interesting thing becomes the extent to which those transitions in your political class is related to any transitions that you might concurrently be experiencing in personality type. So there's so much that you can do with these latent transition models, and we want folks to get kind of excited about those as a possibility.
But here's the fun thing. There are so many things that you can do with them that you really have to stay as close to your theory as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So we all agree that one of the greatest movies ever made in the history of cinema is Airplane.
Duh.
And there's a great scene where a woman is on the plane and she's having an anxiety attack, and there's a line of people where they're all shaking her and saying, stop it, snap out of it.
I've got to get out of here. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
That's what I imagine of theory. What's your theory? Is there's this long line of people. All of these are simply alternative representations of your data. You've got to think really carefully. Imagine you have 5 substance use measures and you're looking for clusters of those at age 18, clusters of those at age 25, and clusters of those at age 30, and then looking for those probability of transitioning from one class to the other. Well, an alternative hypothesis is there's actually a smooth trajectory from 18 to 30 that has individual variability and starting point and rate of change over time. And there may be one single homogeneous population in a standard latent curve model, or there may be latent classes of the growth model that's a growth mixture model. These are radically different representations of exactly the same data. And because damn near none of these are nested models, we don't have our usual likelihood ratio tests. We do a lot of squinting and cocking our head with the BIC and the AIC and entropy and all of these things and say, 3? What do you think? You see 3? So my point is, Greg is going to sit in his chair on the airplane and we're all going to line up in the aisle and we're each going to slap him and then shake him and say, what is your theory?
Calm down now. Get back to your seat. I'll take care of this. Calm down. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
It's all just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. What are you doing?
Oh, nothing. I didn't.
What? No. What is that?
Crossword puzzle.
Oh my God.
I've moved to the latent crossword puzzle guy. I knew it was coming. And if anybody knows a 5-letter word for enthusiastic.
None of this matters anyway. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining us. You can subscribe to Quantitude on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever your unknown latent class leads you to seek entertainment. And please leave us a review. You can also follow us on X, Blue Sky, or Instagram. We are at QuantitudePod. And visit our website at quantitudepod.org, where you can leave us a message, find playlists, show notes, class syllabi, and other fun stuff. Finally, get cool Quantitude merch like mug stickers and notebooks from redbubble.com, where all proceeds from non-bootleg authorized sellers go to donorschoose.org to help support low-income schools. This episode of Quantitude has been brought to you by the all-new Quantitude Faculty Latent Class Bingo Card. Why limit yourself to a boring structured symptom checklist and latent class assignment rubric when you can make diagnosing your colleagues into a fun and engaging game? Distribute our patented Quantitude bingo cards to select individuals at the beginning of a faculty meeting and let the fun begin. Sit back and see if you're a winner by observing behaviors such as inexplicable nodding, extensive note-taking when no one is talking, repetitive arm raising, starting a sentence with yes but, creepy surreptitious looks at younger colleagues, clearly texting with another person in the room, any non sequitur, random deep sighs, questioning why we even bother, and making no effort to hide a crossword puzzle. You have been listening to Quantitude, a latent class of 2.